Great. So, welcome to another Insurindex podcast. And today I'm absolutely delighted and quite excited, I must say, to be joined by John Lombardo. You'll hate me saying this, he was a bit of a hero of mine when he was at the B2B Institute, which we will be talking about.
Ben, I love to hear that kind of stuff. Please, more. Give me more. I thought you'd never say that.
But, it genuinely is. It's kind of like a moment when we can bring the quaint old world of insurance into the mainstream today. I hope we can do that. I'm sure we can do that, and we'll have some fun talking about it.
We have to talk about the fact that I grew up in the insurance capital of the world.
You did, in Hartford.
That's right.
Which has a big sign outside. I've been there, and it's the insurance capital
I'm
of
sorry
the world.
for you. I'm sorry.
No, I enjoyed it. It was good. John, just tell us a little bit about yourself, and I'm going to obviously clearly try and hold myself back, but interject a little bit as we go through your really interesting career, and particularly, obviously, we were talking about B2B really today and how it's relevant to insurance.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can start where I just start with what I just mentioned. I mean, I actually was born in the insurance capital of the world, Hartford, Connecticut, for those of you who are unfamiliar. I don't think it's really the insurance capital of the world anymore, but when I grew up, it was the insurance capital of the world. You know, my father worked in insurance, my uncles worked in insurance, my aunts worked in insurance. So I come from an insurance background. So it's kind of interesting to be back in the insurance world.
And insurance is in just as an aside, insurance in the US is kind of a cultural phenomenon, isn't it? Where I'm not quite sure it is other than Lloyd's in the UK or other markets. It is a cultural thing, isn't it? Kind of some of the plays and theatre and arts have picked it up and things.
Yeah, I guess it could be seen that way. I mean, America has so many things going on. I'm not sure there's the thing I think about when I think about insurance is probably Buffett, honestly.
Yeah.
You know, Buffett maybe in some sense has popularized insurance and in advertising, Geico Gecko, but how you kind of invest your float. You know, I mean, he's the person that I think is most popular and famous and, you know, kind of avuncular and fun who talks about insurance. So yeah, it has become, or it is at least a very well-respected, very big industry. Buffett made it famous, you know, and then obviously like I grew up in the shadow of all these big companies, Travelers and, you know, Cigna and, you know, and the like. And
yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I think here it's seen, we beat ourselves up a bit, and particularly in the London market around it. It's a bit boring. How do we attract talent? You know, people don't read about it at school or think about it because it's not necessarily kind of in the culture in the same way. And I think that is something that, the industry's trying to address a little bit, but I think it's also overplayed sometimes. You know, I don't think people in every industry I've ever been in say, well, I came here by accident, right? You know, they say that in advertising as much as they do in insurance, but it's big, isn't it? So we're talking about commercial insurance today, and we'll come back to that. But tell me a bit about what your just quickly about your background and your career and what you've done, which has all been brilliant, of course.
Yeah, you know, as I said, grew up in Hartford. First actual internship was at AIG.
Oh no!
On Wall Street, which was, you know, the kind of one of the titans of insurance until the financial crisis.
We'll be putting the brand names up on this.
Yeah, right. But yeah, that was actually my first. You know, my dad, as I said, worked in insurance, so he got me a job working in New York. That was my first ever internship. It was quite fun. Then, you know, first job out of school, I actually worked in China for a while.
Right.
And I worked at a place called China Risk Finance, which was actually around managing the risk associated with credit card portfolios. But I think a lot of that is managing risk is obviously core to insurance, right? So risk has been part of what I was born into, even what I worked in. And then, you know, after that I worked for GE, and ultimately, you know, the place that I think you got to know all the work that I did was actually LinkedIn, where, you know, I spent 10 years and a lot of the work was in, honestly, industries that you would consider to be less sexy, let's call it, less exciting.
Yeah.
But these are actually very big growing industries, like bigger than a lot of B2C industries.
Yeah.
So like in some sense, like people would say that, oh yeah, like whatever, P&G, super interesting, super exciting. It's a marketing role. And obviously there's a hugely exciting opportunity to go to a company like P&G, but those are not growing as fast as the big tech companies, or they're not as big as some of the big insurance companies. I mean, so it's just very interesting that the places that maybe are the most profitable place to be are not the sexy places. They're the actually quote unquote boring places.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been in B2B, and I've always said I've always worked for people who earn far more money than I ever will. Yeah. And, you know, it is a really interesting, you know, but quite hidden still, isn't it? And we'll talk about that in a sec. So what was what was the kind of idea, for those that don't know, between the LinkedIn B2B Institute? How did that come about, and how did you get
Yeah,
involved with
most
it?
of our big industries at LinkedIn, as I mentioned, were B2B. So the two biggest by far were finance and tech. But we had a lot of manufacturing, we had a lot of insurance. So we had kind of the whole portfolio of B2B companies marketing and advertising on LinkedIn.
Right.
If you actually just, I love history. And if you go look at the history of advertising, I think Paul Feldwick has
Yeah,
written an incredible
sure.
book on this topic. I mean, to me, he's kind of the grand historian of advertising. Go read that book. It's a great, fun read, and it will just teach you a lot about advertising. But, it goes back to soap operas, and even before that to price tags, and to kind of, like the first, you go back to Wanamaker saying,
Yeah.
in Philadelphia in 1879 or something, I'm half of my budget is wasted. I'm just not sure which half. So, like, there's this long heritage of advertising and marketing
Yeah.
effectiveness in the world of B2C. There's nothing like that in B2B. You
No.
don't have space operas,
No.
you don't have that kind of storied history. And as a result, you don't have a lot of academic research into what's effective and what's not. So the idea at LinkedIn B2B Institute was, what if we could, basically replicate a lot of the things we know about the B2C world, really the laws of growth from Ehrenberg Bass, to put it in simple terms.
Yeah.
Number one, could we replicate those in B2B? Would they hold true?
Right.
Or is B2B totally different?
Yeah.
And it turns out that most of those same core ideas, mental and physical availability, double jeopardy, duplicate purchase, all of those things hold true in B2B just like they do in B2C,
Yeah.
which to me is really exciting because it gave B2B marketers for the first time, and this was done at LinkedIn's B2B Institute, which I helped set up with a couple other
Yeah.
people. It gave B2B marketers the evidence they needed
Yeah.
to go to the sales team or the finance team and get, marketing and brand budgets funded.
And that was exactly what caught my attention, because obviously I'd been working in insurance for quite a long time. You do feel like you're really ploughing a very lonely furrow
Yeah.
in terms of the evidence or the theory, and you're grabbing from, from sectors that people don't relate to.
Yeah.
When you talk to your clients, they're just going, well, that's different. That's not us, right? And occasionally we'd have FMCG, as they used to be called, and still are, coming in as marketing CMOs, and then they'd be there for a year or two and they'd fail, right? Because they try to apply the same things. But the theory was always there. And then I thought, hallelujah when that was done, because I
Yeah.
thought, I don't want more theories. I want one theory to rule them all.
I agree with you. I think people have a tendency to complexity,
Yeah.
and obviously Occam's razor, Occam, a
Yeah.
local famous monk, simplicity, the simpler solution is basically more likely to be the right solution.
Yeah.
And I think, the world isn't so simple that there can be a unified theory, but as far as I can kind of tell from what I know, mental and physical availability, and then having that work in B2C and in B2B, with some minor differences around the involvement of sales in B2B,
Yeah.
and maybe the kind of length of purchase. But generally speaking, mental and physical availability is a very simple mental model to understand how to execute good marketing.
Yeah.
And marketing is much beyond, obviously, just advertising.
Absolutely. Yeah. And actually, advertising has not been a big feature of insurance markets.
Yeah.
Even some of the markets I used to work in, professional services markets, they only latterly came to that when Accenture or Anderson Consulting started doing it. So there wasn't much to go on. But I can remember back in the day, I used to work for Arthur Anderson, and
Yeah,
they
I
used to
remember.
ask this question, which was, is all that advertising that Anderson Consulting is doing rubbing off on us? And the only way we could, in the end, prove it, not through the research, we had to prove it by showing some of the visuals of the ads, by asking the clients, oh, yeah, well, why I remember them is because of this eagle swooping into the water.
Right.
So it was the creative that we proved it by. And they were even, so back in the day, perhaps I should have realized then, and I'd have done what you did, but it was exactly the same thing. It was mental availability, and it was just this thing that caught, and it hit the whole business. It
Yeah.
didn't matter whether one side was paying for it, because that was the kind of inside out thinking, is
Well,
that if
there's
we're
a
not paying
very
for it, we don't get the
important point
benefit.
here that broad reach, fame building advertising like that has a broad set of benefits, offers lots of optionality to a company.
Yeah.
So if you do broad advertising like that, let's say you're Microsoft, you can move into the consumer world. Or if you're
Yeah.
in Google, you can be more of a consumer product and you can move into the cloud business.
Yeah.
So broad-based advertising for insurance companies or technology companies allows you to move into adjacent industries,
Yeah.
and people will know who you are. They'll know who your salespeople are. They're likely to take their call. They're likely to take your meeting. That's kind of the, I would call, professional benefit of it, right? But there's also this, of course, personal benefit that we've all experienced. which I've experienced recently, where when I used to go to a meeting and I'd say I work at LinkedIn, it's like, oh, I know LinkedIn. And in fact, I have 10 different ways I think the LinkedIn product is crap and you ought to fix it. Now, when I go and tell people I work at Evidenza, everyone's like, what? So, I mean,
you're in a small boat there.
There's all these little A/B tests, you know.
Yeah.
My co-founder, Peter Weinberg, talks about what we call the Tokyo test, where we went to Australia and Singapore, and everybody knew LinkedIn. And then we went to Japan, and people in Japan don't really use LinkedIn. They use Facebook actually for business connections. And there was one person in the room. So in Singapore and Australia, it was sold out in multiple, different kind of presentations. And then only one person showed up in Japan. And it just talks about like, they don't have any idea what LinkedIn is. There's no reason to go to that. So, the idea of fame, and you can see when you have a strong brand behind you, literally going from one market to the next, you can see the power of a strong brand, and people don't think enough about that.
No, it's incredibly important. One thing I wanted to ask you about was product. Where does kind of product fit with this? Because I'm dealing with markets now where people are very, very specialist. And one thing I've realized over time is those are really, truly specialist. They have their own little peculiarities, quirks, intricacies. And they can be quite big, even though nobody's, like you said, even though you've never. So you've got businesses within businesses within businesses. So where do they fit with the kind of overall brand thing? Is it how do you make the two work together, or do you?
Well, if you've got great advertising and a terrible product, you won't have a good business.
Sure.
Right. So it isn't to say that, in a commodity market where all products are the same, or when you have a great product, then advertising is really useful. If you have a terrible product, you shouldn't be advertising it. You should fix the product first, right? Or go find another job. So product, I would say, is essential or like necessary, but maybe not sufficient, because equally there are many amazing products that get no distribution. Nobody knows about them. They win no market share. They make no money. They don't have the ability to grow. So product is necessary, but not sufficient. The way I would frame this, I guess, in the context of marketing science and mental and physical availability, I really love the category entry points framework from Jenny Romaniuk.
Same here. Love it.
And, and it's basically the marketing version of the Clayton Christensen idea of jobs to be done. So it's, again, not about me, the brand. It's about my customer and what does the customer need? The customer needs a cybersecurity solution so they don't get hacked, so they don't lose their job, so they can run their business uninterrupted, so they can be protected as they enter new markets, all these reasons they need it. So those are insights, of course, that can be communicated from a comms or marketing or advertising perspective. But equally, you could share those insights with your product team and say, hey, the real fear here is that the CTO or the CIO is going to get a call at 2:00 in the morning saying, we just got hacked. So maybe the insight there is then I'm going to use AI to build a kind of like a bat phone where you can press that button at any time and somebody globally will immediately take your call. Like that's a product solution. That is not an advertising solution, but you could also market that as, hey, we've got this amazing new feature and we want you all to know about it, and we're the most trustworthy and responsive decision for you.
So these products really are solutions, aren't they, that are provided in this brand framework? And I've just been talking to somebody about customer experience, and they said exactly the same thing, actually, which is that everything in the end is a solution for somebody. And if you don't really work out what that solution is, as you say, your product really isn't very good. It isn't doing what it's supposed to do. I mean, it might last for a while for whatever reason. I mean, particularly in insurance, if it's you have to buy the product, for example, but ultimately it's gonna kind of suffer. The other, I just wanted to come back to one point you made there as well, which is about the ability now, from the evidence you've had of brand working to help businesses move into adjacent markets. Does that change the idea, which I always used to deal with, which was brand extension? I used to say, well, you've probably gone beyond where you can go to with this. And I didn't necessarily know what I was talking about, except I thought they were just in a space they shouldn't be. But does it change that? Is that brand extension still relevant? You can only go so far with a brand, or can you go further now with this new knowledge?
I think you can go, brands I think have a lot of stretch to them. They have a lot of elasticity, right? Like we talk about brands increasing price elasticity. Well, brands have brand elasticity too. But that's really something that is one of the core benefits of a brand. Is that it does allow you to move into these new markets and not start from zero. So there's no question that it allows for that. But I still think this idea, which you could borrow from Silicon Valley around product market fit or brand market fit, you do have to have in some sense, like a product that can deliver the solution as we described. And you have to have some sense that this is a core competency that you can extend into. So if managing risk is your core competency, you can imagine how it goes from, we're a broker and we're going to go into like just kind of retail insurance, right?
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
imagine how that works. If you're going to go into, making peanut butter sandwiches, well, that's probably more of a stretch. Like
Yeah.
at that point, you're going to break the band, right? The
Yeah.
elastic band, like that's
Yeah.
too much
Yeah.
stretch. So
Yeah.
I think you still have to do it within reason. But most businesses obviously understand that concept. But brands are really valuable in that way because as you at some point, if you're the dominant player in a market, you need to then move into an
Yeah.
adjacent market. And the primary way I think to do that is to have a strong brand that allows for that. There are other ways to do it as well, but brand makes all that so much easier on so many different dimensions. Like we did a lot of work at LinkedIn around understanding the effect of brand, not just on marketing, but also on sales and on
Yeah.
talent. And one of the things that we saw across hiring, marketing, and selling is that more famous brands, they had more people apply for jobs. They had more people respond to their salespeople. They had more people fill out lead forms.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
across all
Yeah. It
dimensions,
works.
brand
Yeah.
is super important, super valuable.
We have found exactly the same thing, and I must make the point that we sat down and looked at our research, which we've done for years. Trends. So we had all the data, all the back data, and we just kind of ran the numbers, and pretty much everything stacked up. And also, actually, I mean, in terms of consideration, for example, awareness, I think we have a number of a broker being 7 times more likely to place a risk with an insurer just if they're aware of them.
Yep.
Spontaneously, it is, and that was a little bit of a revelation when we saw that. And it was really back to this, I think the point you and Peter were making, that I'm not sure you had the evidence, or you said it's probably going to be the case that in B2B, this effect will ratchet up because people are so much more kind of homogeneous. They're kind of trained in the same way. They all work in the same ecosystem. If you take London market, it literally is a square mile or less where everybody knows everybody. So we were seeing the effect being even bigger than a consumer market.
Yeah, there's a weird, I guess, belief that, and Peter and I are still thinking a lot about this, but one of the most famous things, certainly the most famous thing actually now that I think about it, is the 95-5 rule, right? And the 95-5 rule effectively says that 95% of people in a category are not going to be in market in this moment. Maybe 5% of them will be in market in the next quarter or in the next year. But in most markets, especially in B2B markets, people are not buying today. They're buying at some point in the future.
Yeah.
Obviously, B2C is different. Milk, you're buying milk probably once a week. But even in the world of automotives, for example, like you're buying cars or automobiles, you're buying cars probably once every 10 years. So like there's a continuum on the B2C side from how often are people in market. There's the milk part of it, which is all the time.
Yeah.
And then there's the automobile part of it, or luxury part of it, which is very rarely.
Yeah.
And the reality is that even many of those B2C categories behave more like B2B categories. But in the B2B categories, there is obviously like you're not buying cybersecurity all the time. You're not buying computers for your staff all the time. You're not buying cloud computing services all the time. So if you're not buying, there's no point in putting a message in front of you that says buy now, right? It's just not, or it shouldn't be the vast majority of the advertising you do. So in some weird way, the place to really do kind of bottom of funnel marketing is actually consumer marketing, where people are buying very frequently.
Yes.
So if I look at jeans, it makes sense to retarget me for 3 days in a row saying buy the jeans because I'm buying now.
Yeah.
But in a weird way, like if you take the kind of like top funnel, bottom funnel, like it ought to be maybe 50-50 there, something like that, right?
Right.
In B2B, it ought to be much more brand heavy because people are just not in market. So the jobs that you do build mental availability. Like think of me when you have a ransomware event. Think of me when you're concerned about your security. Think of me in advance of purchase, because when you do move into the market, as you say, you're really only going to shortlist 1 or 2 people.
Yeah, and you don't have to have a knowledge build, do you? I mean, I know that the people we research, the brokers in our markets, they know the products really, really well. I mean, that's not their problem.
Yes.
It's who am I going to place this risk with today, this morning, when the client, the risk has come in from the US into Lloyd's or into London at 6 o'clock in the morning. Where am I going to do this? And they're shuffling bits of paper around or looking at spreadsheet. That moment is the same as every other purchase moment, isn't it?
They're going to probably buy from the person they placed with last time. or they're going to buy from the most famous brand, because people understand the signaling theory of advertising, which is if this brand can spend a lot of money on advertising in advance of my purchase, so spending the money before they expect to make the money, that communicates they're a strong, healthy, basically like smart brand that manages money well, and I can trust them with my money as a result. So, so B2B is weirdly, again, it should be more, it's not brand forward, as you know, it's brand backwards. But it should be brand forward because the data from 95.5 effectively says people are not buying, so don't get them to try to buy now. Just get them to think of you, so when they do buy next time, you're one of the 2 or 3 brands that get shortlisted. Because if you don't, then there's no chance, obviously, to make the sale.
Yeah, and so that's, and I think that's exactly what we see in the data. We see that those choices are largely based on brand, but we're not evaluating all the rationality, all the training they've had to get to that point. And the other thing you said there, which I think is really interesting, is yes, they go to people then that they know. So they're going into the easiest entry point to say, I know John or I know Julie, they've written this risk before. But there's also a memory availability play there too, because those people become quite well known in their own right. And there's always this, is it the people or is it the brand a bit still? But I always think they just represent the brand in a sense.
There's a fun, in the 95.5 rule paper that John Dawes wrote, there's actually a number of footnotes. And one of the footnotes is, I think, called The Secret Life of Search. If it's not called The Secret Life of Search, it should be called The Secret Life of Search. But it essentially says, it says that when people search for something, they click on basically the most famous brand. Like that's actually what they do there. So that's a place where rationally you would think in a search box, I search for something, and in theory, like whether it's branded or unbranded, it's the most relevant result that Google picked for me. So I could probably choose the unbranded one and trust that too. That is not actually how people behave. I mean, people are still attracted to big famous brands. And you underinvest in your brand at your own peril.
Yeah. And you can see that. I talk to people occasionally about, insurance aggregators, which are big in the UK, and they're not as big in the US, I know. But the point at which, when you get your quotes back, which one do you choose? Do you choose the top one because it's the cheapest price? And I had a conversation with someone the other week who work in technology, 2 guys, and they said, well, I used to work for an aggregator, and I know it's all price based. And the other guy said, I don't think so, because when I choose the third one down and a name that I know, because I've traded off between the price difference and the brand, basically, which is all kind of classic old marketing stuff about trade-off, isn't it? That you choose the branded product on the shelf as long as the price isn't killing you or something.
Yeah, that's right. Like brands obviously can charge too much, but people are generally like, think of like an aspirin or a Tylenol, like these kind of very, like at their core, just commodity products. It's like a set of chemical formulations. People still pay for the famous version rather than the white label version, even though they know it's the exact same thing.
Absolutely.
It has to be by law the exact same thing. Like there are many products, many categories like that. So the idea that brand is not important, obviously that just is kind of, factually inaccurate. But it's amazing how people just think it's all rational.
Yes.
Like this is another thing that, like last night I was at this event and Rory Sutherland was talking, and I think, he's wonderful around like his idea of logical and psychological. And B2B especially has the problem that they're way too logical about everything. Especially marketing. And his point is there are many creative ways, whether it be advertising or product or packaging or communication, many psychological ways of extracting value and creating value that don't require a lot of work, and that's fascinating as an insight. And I wish more B2B firms took seriously that idea, because brand is probably the most valuable business tool ever invented.
No, I was going to ask you something, because something occurred to me that I've seen as we've worked with companies, and is this thing of, if you remember the old American Express ads, do you know me, or whatever, which was basically saying it's about me. Not about this green card. But it's also kind of what this card says about me, but it's what I say about myself, really. And I think that's incredibly powerful, even in B2B, which is, I'll use a Hiscox, because it's, and we've talked to brokers about this, is, that's cool. That's easy. I always talk about the bar conversation with clients, which is, do you think people would talk about you in a bar? Would they bring your name up and say, hey, did you see what was happening at no name insurer? Well, they wouldn't. But
Why
if
do
you're
you think?
Hiscox, they'll talk about it.
Why do you think? I mean, you're obviously familiar with the fact that in the most interesting advertising in the United States is from the car insurance category.
Yeah.
Right. You have Geico Gecko, you have Flow from Progressive, you have
Yeah.
Mayhem from Allstate, and you have Limu, Emu, and Greg, and all of the Liberty stuff.
Yeah. Well done.
Does
You've
that
done that really
exist?
well, by the way.
Thank you. I'm very familiar with all of their distinctive brand assets down to the jingles, jingle all the way. Does that same has that basically ported over to London in any way? Like, do you have that in the insurance market? And you definitely wouldn't have it in the brokerage market.
So we have some. We have mostly really kind of quite rational classic B2B advertising product stuff, but it is changing. We have some of the specialty businesses. Beazley, for example, has been doing some really interesting advertising. I mean, they've been building their brand for many years, but they have used certainly design, graphical representation of their brand, which is a kind of pink, which is great.
Are they the only pink brand in the insurance
No, they're not.
category?
There's quite a few pink brands,
Really?
and obviously pink is a great. I mean, I
Yeah, super
understand
distinctive,
design, right?
yeah.
Super.
Right,
It's
distinctive.
always kind of modern. I mean, I went to I went to the Beazley launch of what they've called their 80 years in around the world, which is them saying they've been doing insurance for 80 years. It's not quite 80 years. They've added a couple of continents together and called it 80. But anyway, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, don't let the actual number of years get in the way of a good story.
No, exactly. But it's the Jules Verne, idea, and around the world in 80 days. But I was at the Natural History Museum, and they put a splash of pink over the dinosaur, the whale skeleton, which is called Hope, which hangs up in the big hall in Heinz Hall, and it's got this beautiful big splash of pink, So the branding effectively works there, and this is creative, and they've got brand assets. They've used their sort of heritage, their bowler hat as a brand asset, and they've got it now on top of a bus going around the US, coming to a town.
Love a good bowler hat, Thomas Crown Affair.
And then Hiscox has also done some co-branding, which is interesting, where they've done it around intellectual property insurance, where they've said if you've accidentally taken another brand name in vain, and they've actually got these other brands, quite famous brands in the UK, consumer brands, and where the inference is that you've mistakenly used this and you're getting sued by them, so that you've got this Hiscox insurance, But it's clever because they've used all these different brands. Now, there isn't too much use yet of humor, interestingly.
Can I ask you one more question?
Yeah, sure.
The distinctive assets part of it.
Yeah.
What I love about distinctive assets is you can very quantifiably, or you can quantify you can quantify the color pink in association with Beazley or the bowler hat, right? Like the codes can be linked to the category, and then you can see how many people know them, right? Which is the unique number out of 100, who just say it's Beazley, and then how many of them, have seen it, right? Which is the fame part of it. So you can quantify all this stuff, and that's effectively quantifying an intangible asset, which somebody would care about in the C-suite. The CFO especially would care about that, because
absolutely,
it's an intangible asset which drives stock value, and it also reduces risk. So are these firms doing distinctive asset research like this? Are they quantifying it in a way to express to the board the value they're creating?
They're not doing that. And I know Mark Ritson talked about the codes that are built in, and I thought that was really interesting, because you can quantify, and of course we can set up questions to get at that, to say, I mean, do you remember pink? Does it associate? I mean, there's been a big debate about this,
right.
Does the traveler's red look catch your attention? Or the one that we talk about here is The Economist, because it's a really distinctive red.
Yes, it is.
And there was a debate saying, oh, nobody remembers that, it's just a red. I actually think you do get it.
Yeah, if you
straight
ask
away,
people which publication in the UK is most associated with the color red, I think everybody would say The Economist.
Yeah, so these codes...
And probably wouldn't name any other brand, so it would be high uniqueness and broad fame, which is what you want.
Absolutely. And interestingly, there are specialty brands in London that have done some quite cool things in the past with identity, which I'd pretty much put it in the identity category. There's no real brand development behind it, but the identities are color codes.
Yeah.
And what we've looked at, for example, is now, because you're going into digital trading, for example, so you used to have the old Lloyd's thing where you would, you'd actually have the pen. So it was called the wet signing of the underwriting risk. So you'd actually sign it with a big quill pen. But nowadays on digital systems, that doesn't happen. But you have a version of that, which is a digital signatory on the slip where all the risks are listed.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an area that we've been looking at as to what's going to happen with co-branding on that, because
could the signing be in pink if it's Beazley?
Well, it could be, or it could be the AIG, which is a well-known logo, and you could have that. So what we were looking at was, suddenly you multiply up for these brokers the visibility
Yeah.
and the memory availability, therefore, of these brands in these digital things, because you've gone suddenly from what I think Les Binet talks about is quantum. You've
Yeah.
gone from people working in a very, what was quite an old fashioned, I'll actually literally walk across the street to meet somebody and I'll see their offices
Yeah.
and now they're saying, well, I'm sitting in my office, but I'm seeing this brand pop up 5,000 times a day in front of me. So
Yeah.
then I think your codes become really
No,
important,
and it also
actually.
comes back to your point about product. You can bake the codes into the product, and then product and marketing, as they
Yeah.
should be, are basically the same thing. You know?
So if you think, say somebody gets a cyber product right, and it's a Beasley Pink, right? They do actually do a lot of cyber, but then you look at this, you're sitting there and you're going, oh yeah, Pink Beasley
Right.
Cyber, Pink Beasley Cyber.
But the problem is
Boom.
nobody's like, I remember my first job, my first big corporate job. I worked in China for a bunch of time. I came back and I worked at an agency that did trends for a while, and then I got a job at GE. And I remember every once in a while I would send something out, and I would get an email from the brand czar at GE, a gentleman named Ivan, and he'd be like, "Hey, like
Literally a czar.
you didn't follow, the brand kind of guidelines
Yeah.
here." And I was always like, you know what, like this is absurd. Like, why is he policing me like this?
Mm.
Which was a complete wrong way to understand it.
Yeah.
Like I have shame about that experience
Yeah.
now, because now I think about, it is about meticulously managing the assets down to like the signature being in pink now, as you say, the quantum way of doing it.
Yeah.
And the point is that the more we do that, the stronger our brand becomes, the more
Yeah.
people know our brand, the more likely they are to recognize our billboards or recognize our TV ads or know this is our product, and then the more likely they are to buy us. Nobody ever made for me the link between the strength of the codes and then the strength of the firm value,
Yeah.
Like it's something you maybe intuitively should understand if you're in marketing, and maybe that's on me, but I wish now I knew I wish I knew then what I knew now, and I wish somebody had explained it to me in that way,
And I think a
the
lot of
financial way.
we did a a session in November last year with some CMOs from insurers, and they were all developing brands, and they were talking about what they were doing and how they got buy-in from their boards, and they basically said, well, we've got to be part of the strategy and the commercial part of the business. We're not just a side arm of a business in marketing, and that was great. It was really good to hear, and it was fantastic. I wanted to though link that into a story which is one of the most successful businesses was Catlin in the London market. It became synonymous with a brand, one, and two, with its service quality and values. It set up kind of values for what it did and didn't do. And it was led by a chap called Stephen Catlin, and he's still around. He's set up another super successful business called Convex. But he, one of the things about what he did in at the time when that business was growing and building was, I used to go to their offices around the world, and they all said, well, Stephen Catlin comes in. And the first thing he does is he checks the Pantone colors on the brochures, the umbrellas that we've got. He checks all the collateral around the office, and woe betide you if that stuff is not right, or we've, as you just said, we've done something ourselves, DIY. That business sold, hugely on the goodwill that it had created and the brand it had built.
Yeah.
So isn't it interesting that the really truly commercial people, just working in a commercial space, not a marketing space, are getting the same thing,
I mean, a great business will be built off of obviously a great product that's priced properly, distributed in the right places, placement, and then promoted in the right way. And as we've been talking about, like the pink needs to go everywhere. It's part of everything, right? It isn't just something you reserve for kind of the promotion part of it. But I mean, I do love this idea of very commercial people taking the brand very seriously.
Yeah, it's good.
But the brand people need to get better at communicating to the commercial people the value of this stuff.
I agree.
Which is not something that is, in my estimation, having traveled the world for LinkedIn, talking to all these people, they are not doing it.
No.
And the reality is, coming back to the mental and physical availability kind of idea, the Ehrenberg Bass idea, one of the things I do like about it, other than its simplicity, is it's very quantifiable.
Yeah.
So you can tell a story about the fact that the primary thing that drives, especially in something like insurance, is intangible value. And we can do things like measure how many people think of us in buying situations, which contributes to sales, or how many people recognize our brand codes, which contributes to intangible asset value. You can do these things, measure these things, and report on these things to your board, to your CEO. You can be better at communicating the price premium it drives through this kind of meticulous down to the Pantone management. But not enough people are doing that.
No, I agree, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it cuts both ways, doesn't it? I mean, we need good people to be curious about this stuff, and we need to be looking at data much more. There's not much data really in the insurance, but there's certainly the commercial.
We should talk about synthetic data.
Yeah, we should. So that leads us very nicely on to. Let me just just set it up, John. So
Yeah.
you're at the B2B Institute, and then you think, oh, one morning, do you and Peter both wake up and go, right, AI is the future. We've got to do it. Is that how it happened? And then we can talk a bit more about it.
Yeah, I mean, it was slowly and then suddenly was how it
Yeah,
happened. But honestly, it comes back to the point you just made. There's not a lot of insurance in the data in the insurance industry, right? In this way, and that was a constraint we had at LinkedIn. We would run these category entry point analyses for tech and for finance, and they were great. Our clients absolutely loved them. The reality is we just couldn't scale them because they took a couple of months to do. They often cost, 150, $200,000 or
yeah,
pounds. So they were effectively slow and expensive, and you could only include a set number of brands in
yeah,
them. So there was these constraints that meant we couldn't scale them. And it turns out that AI is a constraint killer. So like there's this kind of idea around AI that you could used to have it kind of like faster, better, cheaper, choose two, right? Now you can have it all. So we figured out that you can do a lot of the same ideas, mental and physical availability, that you are doing with humans through human surveys,
yeah,
organic, right? You
yeah.
can now do that synthetically. So I can create a synthetic Ben or a synthetic John who's an insurance manager or insurance buyer or insurance broker. And there's all this information online that you can channel into them to build these digital twins. So they
Right.
have an understanding of the category and the customers and the competitors and all of the dynamics. And they can give you a response that is, like 85, 90% reflective of what you would get from a real person. And the accuracy rates get better and better and better every day, which is obviously not true. So in the synthetic world, we always say it's getting better and better and better. Obviously, the human world, I wouldn't say it's getting worse and worse and worse, but I would say it's clearly staying the same versus getting better. So synthetic, I do believe, is ultimately going to be better for lots of either generation of data or kind of surveying of audiences. But to come back to your original way of talking about it or asking, like that is something that we had a constraint, we had a business problem,
Yeah,
and it became clear that AI could be the solution to the business problem.
yeah.
So a lot of people go and say like, oh, I want to chase the new thing, which is AI,
Mm.
and we didn't do that. I think that's kind of in some ways, you see that a lot on LinkedIn and other places where somebody who was talking about crypto 6 months ago is
Yeah,
now
yeah, yeah,
talking
yeah,
about AI. And
yeah,
that's kind of a very grifty way of doing it.
yeah.
Ours was a very thrifty way of doing it, which was more
And it's
like
kind of
we needed to
deterministic,
solve a
isn't it? That
problem.
thinking, I always think, is it when I listen to people who are, at tech conferences and things talking about AI, they're kind of very deterministic about it. They say things like, well, we've in 3 years' time, 99% of everything will be AI driven, and you go, well, I don't know where you got that figure from, because you haven't got any sources or anything else. It used to be, if you remember, there was a figure about the growth of accountancy, which is going so fast, but then when you actually
Yeah.
looked at the numbers, every single man, woman, and child on the planet would have been an accountant in about 10 years if they'd actually extrapolated that number. So yes, I think you're not doing the hype thing.
Yeah. But
What?
this is so I think you raise an important point right around kind of like separating hype from reality. But as I said earlier, I'm very fond of history. And in history, you can kind of look at organic and synthetic products,
Yeah,
starting with vanilla back in 1874. And it was so good, people loved it so much, they were like, well, let's produce it synthetically so we can have it,
yeah,
kind of more broadly available, more cheaply available. That same thing is true of synthetic rubber, which during the war, World War II, like we
right.
couldn't have enough of it, so we had to produce it faster and cheaper and better. And synthetic rubber, there's synthetic, oil, which goes in all of our cars.
Yeah.
Synthetic insulin used to be made with human insulin, and now it's made with synthetic insulin. And
Mm.
that's the kind of thing that it took 20 years to go from being a purely organic market or human market to being now a synthetic market.
Yeah.
Even diamonds, synthetic diamonds are the kind of most recent version of this, where the complaint about synthetic diamonds now is that there's an article in the Wall Street Journal on January 3rd, you can read, where the complaint is that synthetic diamonds are too big, too good, and too cheap.
Yeah,
So I
right.
do think ultimately the world goes from, let's call it organic to synthetic, but I don't think there's ever going to be a bifurcation, or there'll always be a bifurcation where you still do both. It just is
Yeah,
the question of how they
that's
work
what I was going
together.
to ask. So
Yeah.
there is still going to be that balance, and it will. I presume it will kind of go back and forth a little bit because you're. I mean, I tell you what I was thinking about was kind of wine, right?
Yeah.
I like wine, but that's too much. But wine these days it's an industry, and the
Yeah.
big winemakers make it in aluminium
Yeah. Right.
vats, and it's a science where it just literally
Yeah.
you press the button and it produces the wine. And I live next door to a vineyard, so they told me exactly how that all operates, and it's just an industrial process, right?
Yeah.
But but there are still wines produced in different ways, organic
Yeah.
wines and all those sorts of things, and it seems to me they still kind of learn from one another, because you still got the real, the real stuff, if there's such a thing
Yeah.
anymore, and then the kind of, this is how we industrialize it. Is that kind of how you
Yeah,
think
I think
about it?
that's right. I mean, people often talk about a barbell where like the middle kind of goes away and you have just the ends. And I think, like, like even I'll give you like a very concrete example today. Some people will, when they want to run market research with us, they'll give us, this is the sample of people we want to reach in the insurance industry. Here are the questions we want to ask.
Mm.
Some people will run that survey with us to our synthetic audiences as a way to pre-test the survey before they field the survey with actual people.
Ah,
And
right.
that's really quite clever because it's a way to remove what's often called survey remorse, where, oh, I didn't quite ask the question
Oh God,
properly,
yes, I
but
know
I
that.
fielded it, and to do it
Yeah.
again would be too expensive. And so I just have to live with
Uh,
that regret, that remorse,
Tell me
right?
about
And then on the opposite
it.
side, as we know, people don't like filling out surveys and often don't fill out surveys. So there's survey fatigue.
Mm.
Well, in our case, you have basically digital twins or digital robots that are acting like your customers, impersonating your customers.
Mm.
They will answer the first question and the 30th question with the same level of attention. So I think synthetic brings these things together. But you can use it in a variety of ways. As I just said, you can use it as a pretest. Let's test it before we use it with humans,
Yeah.
or let's run the entire thing and then go to a focus group and just ask them about some things maybe we didn't fully understand when we did the synthetic research. So
Yeah.
you can kind of use synthetic and human together in a lot of ways. Maybe in the end, it will simply just be that you have your customer on demand synthetically, and that's the synthetic part. But the AI is not going to take your customer out to dinner. It's not going to build trust with them. It's not going to pick up their phone call, and so there's going to be different ways in which humans and synthetic work together, and I think it will be a
Yeah.
better overall combination. But like a fun example that I'm not sure how it entirely makes sense yet, but AI has been able to beat chess,
Yeah.
beat people in chess for 25 years now. Like
Yeah.
Kasparov
Yeah.
got beat by Big Blue
Yeah.
a long time ago,
Yeah.
but people still watch Magnus Carlsen play
Right.
other humans.
Of course.
And so just because something is clearly better, AI is clearly better at doing something, doesn't mean that we still won't want to talk to humans or meet with humans or watch humans, right? And so that'll get kind of figured out.
Isn't it the same thing as everybody is saying now in tech? They go like a herd, don't they? But everybody in tech used to talk about cost effectiveness and cost savings and all this sort of stuff. Now every tech person I see gets up and says, "No, we're about human enablement," or some version of that story, which is that this is freeing humans up. And this is kind of the same, isn't it? I mean, it seems to me we've never had enough time to spend on the detail of what's going on with the customer experience or your product line, or all those things you want to spend more time on.
Yeah.
You're spending half the time saying, well, can we get the response rate up, or can we fiddle with the questions, or can we fix not asking the right question?
Yeah.
Which is immensely wasteful, isn't it? Unproductive.
Well, the
Me.
world has gotten more and more automated over time. But if you go ask any professional in tech or in finance or in insurance if they're time rich or if they're time poor, they'll still tell you that they're time poor.
Yes.
So to me, this is just the kind of like next step in automation. We'll automate even more things.
Yeah.
But there is an infinite amount of things for humans to do. I think there will still be everybody you talk to in 5 or 10 years where AI is pervasive like electricity. They will still tell you that they're time poor. Because to your point, we'll just find new things to do better that we couldn't do before. So maybe it will be measuring things down to the Pantone, which we didn't previously have time for. Maybe we'll have time to do that now. But I'm always skeptical of people who think that AI will just replace all of the jobs. I mean, if you think about even going back to like the Industrial Revolution, everybody was a farmer. And then in 200 years, there are no farmers anymore. Everything's mechanized.
Yeah.
And yet we have much bigger economies, many more jobs, and we're still time poor. So the kind of history of this is that there's a disruption period, but it will just create new, different jobs, whether in insurance or any other industry.
So the theory that I like is the kind of one about, which economists supposedly missed, was about ideas, really, which is that ideas drive economies, and that the history has really been about the priests and so on. Once they were off the scene, we could all do stuff with ideas. And my little example is, the 16-year-old that goes and does a makeup thing on YouTube or whatever, or TikTok nowadays, and makes millions, and you sit there having done a 30-year career in market research going, oh, how the hell did that happen then?
This is a great insight, which comes back to our tangible versus intangible conversation. Yeah. People tend to think about peak oil was a very big idea, right? People think in very finite, in very tangible terms. But in fact, the right way to think about it is how you just described it, which is don't think in tangible terms, think about intangible terms.
Yeah. Yeah.
And ideas are a renewable resource. There are always more of them. There are always different versions of them. AI may help you get to them smarter or better or faster or cheaper. But if you think about in finite terms, tangible terms, yes, you'll imagine that the world is constrained. If you think about ideas as being the kind of key resource, not oil, then it's renewable and
Yeah.
infinite. And I agree with you. That's a much more both optimistic, I think, and also realistic way to think about
Yeah.
anything that you do.
Yeah. So we're kind of running out of time, but this has been brilliant. Obviously, we could talk about this for hours and hours, and we will. But what I wanted to do, we're going to work together. We are working together on insurance, and we're doing the human, and we're doing so practically. What are your kind of thoughts on how that works? If we if there's an insurer listening into this,
Yeah.
what are the steps? What are we doing? I mean, I can tell you, but
Yeah.
you're much better at it than me.
Well, I mean, insurance has a very clear problem that we identified at LinkedIn, which is if you can do the research at all, it's slow and expensive.
Mm.
And you often can't do the research at all because,
Yeah.
as you said, it's hard to find the people, hard
Yeah.
to find the data. The beauty of synthetic research is that it can help you to do the research with very hard to reach populations,
Yeah.
and then how you do that research. We've been talking about a lot of the ways to do it, but like a simple way to do it is who buys our category, when do they buy our category, why do they buy our category, right? Just like just generally understand through market research the questions you want to understand them. Another one is segmentation. Segmentation is a type of research. How many different buyers are there in the market? How should we divide the market?
Yeah.
Where should we play in the market? So segmentation is a super useful way of doing things that can be done with AI in a very fun way that is honestly like those things cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and take forever, and you don't have to do that anymore, right? So there's kind of market research generally. There's segmentation, targeting, and positioning your core strategy. So like, here are my key segments. These are the ones I'm going to target. Here's what I'm going to say. Like, don't worry about having to be woken up at 2:03 a.m. The cybersecurity risk, Beasley's got your back. Stuff like that, right? So so all that core marketing strategy or marketing research, you can do all that stuff.
So what really excites me about it, and we're going to look at this together, is really where insurers run kind of portfolios of all sorts of classes of business, which they kind of come in and out of at various times depending on what's happening in the insurance cycle, right? But this, it seems to me, we can do a lot of work. We could never do studies that big or that detailed in each of these segments, and some of them are just tiny slivers, right? Where take reinsurance, there aren't that many people, but it's huge financially. It's huge financially, but you can't interview all of them.
No.
But it seems to me now we can really profile these. We could go across their portfolio and go, well, look, these are the ones which have got appeal. These are not. These are, this is what's going on here. This is your competition, and do that very quickly, and then kind of iterate. And that, to me, is, that changes how you look at the market and the data you've got quite substantially.
Yeah, I think if you could imagine out 5 or 10 years, like you ought to basically be able to have some sort of system that understands how to write market research, field the research to the right audience, the synthetic audience. Based on those insights, develop a segmentation, targeting, positioning, core strategy, test some messaging to figure out which is most responsive to which audiences, figure out where to distribute all of that, and then also how to measure that in both financial terms up front. So quantify the segments and the positioning by financial value and say, we're going after this one because it's worth $1.7 billion. We're ignoring number 5 because it's only worth $400 million.
Yeah.
So you ought to basically have this system that does research, segmentation, target position, creative, distribution, measurement all together, spit out a marketing plan with financials attached that you can then take to your sales team, take to your finance team. Like, that's what people ought to, like, we're already doing most elements of that today.
Right.
It's going to become more refined. It's going to become more evolved, but this is kind of the conversation we were having and have been having around fighting finance with finance, or financializing the conversation for the board. And then you're going to get much more of your marketing funded. Your career is going to grow. Your team is going to grow. It's going to be better for everybody. But it is like using AI to inform lots of these very specific marketing and finance decisions.
It is. It's very exciting because you can easily conceptualize putting the financial numbers onto the research numbers, looking at where where the demand's coming from.
That's exactly right.
And then doing it in all these different segments, but doing it as a wash. Then, I mean, I think you've also said, and this may be a point to finish on, it's still though really important, isn't it, that you understand that industry and you kind of have that narrative. You've talked about this because otherwise the data's just data, isn't it? And it doesn't tell you, it doesn't kind of jump off the page and explain itself.
I mean, listen, when there's now an infinite number of answers, right? AI will answer anything. So the quality of the questions becomes more important.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you can ask a question, really bad question, and get a really bad answer that would be catastrophic for your business. So the idea of like knowing what to ask or taste, which often comes from category or industry expertise, is incredibly important. So when we do the work I just described, like in some sense, like, yes, will the AI be able to learn over time what to do? Probably, but it will require a lot of the marketer's influence and taste to define the research properly, to think about the trade-offs and the segmentation, to figure out who to target, how to actually position, and then ultimately how to tell that story, back to your point,
Yeah.
in a way that they know will resonate with the human at the table,
Yeah.
which is the sales director or the finance director. So
Yeah.
there's an enormous role for taste and for decision,
Yeah.
and that's not going away. And in some sense, that's where having domain expertise or kind of category expertise is really valuable.
In the end, it's a really different way of thinking as well, isn't it?
It is.
That's what it is. John, absolutely fantastic. I wish we'd had 3 hours. We haven't got 3 hours, we've got 1 hour. And we're going to do some more talking about it tomorrow at our marketing summit event, and we're going to be working together. So watch this space. Thank you very much, John. Brilliant.
Look forward to it. Thank you very much. Check us out at Evidenza.